Nothing and nobody will ever hurt you again. Carl Jung. Moti. What if you could reach a point where nothing and no one could ever hurt you again? Inspired by the powerful ideas of Carl Jung, this video dives deep into the psychology of emotional detachment, self-protection, and inner strength. It's not about becoming cold, it's about reclaiming your power. Learn how to stop giving your energy to those who don't deserve it, and build the unshakable mindset Jung believed was essential for true individuation. KCHBN. There comes a moment in every life when the hurt becomes too heavy to carry, and silence starts to scream louder than words. When the soul, exhausted from pretending, begins to whisper, "This is not who I am." You know that moment. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or drama. It creeps in through the smallest cracks, the tired mornings, the hollow victories, the nights you cry without sound because you've forgotten how to ask for help. It's the moment your reflection no longer recognizes the masks you've worn to survive. The smile feels foreign. The eyes distant. That moment is not your breaking. That moment is your awakening. Because pain doesn't mean you're weak. Pain means your soul is trying to communicate what your mind has tried to suppress. The body remembers what the mind forgets. And when the pain returns, not as punishment, but as message, it asks just one thing of you. Will you finally listen? This is where the journey begins. Not with triumph, but with truth. Not with answers, but with the courage to ask the only question that matters: who am I? Beneath the noise. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But before you become, you must become everything that you were taught to be. You must unlearn the fear that made you shrink, unlearn the roles that made you obedient, unlearn the guilt that made you silence your needs. And in that unlearning, you will confront the very thing you've been running from, with the self, not the curated self. Not the version of you that performs for applause. The real self. The one buried beneath years of trauma, expectations, and adaptations. The self that remembers the dreams you buried. The boundaries you ignored. The voice you silenced to keep the peace. But peace built on self-abandonment is not peace, it's prison. And if you're here, listening to these words, then somewhere within you, a rebellion has begun. Quiet, perhaps. Subtle. But fierce. You're no longer satisfied with coping, you want clarity. You're no longer interested in survival, you want sovereignty. Because you've realized nothing out there can save you. Not the title. Not the relationship. Not the money. Not the image. You've tried. You've chased. And still, the emptiness returned, sharper, louder, more insistent. Because what you're searching for isn't more. What you're searching for is yourself. You cannot fix a soul by feeding the ego. You cannot heal a wound by pretending it isn't there. You cannot protect your heart by building walls so high even your own light can't get through. This is where the transformation begins, not in changing your circumstances, but in reclaiming your authority over them. The power has never been out there. It's always lived in your ability to choose, to respond, to awaken. And yes, the pain was real. Yes, they hurt you. Yes, life broke you in places that still ache when you remember. But listen to me, and listen well. What happened to you is not more powerful than what lives within you. And you no longer need to be defined by who hurt you, or who left you, or who never saw you. Because you see you now, and that changes everything. The moment you stop looking outward for validation, the moment you stop negotiating your worth, the moment you stop giving people permission to decide your value, is the moment you begin to live, not exist. Live. And to live, truly, deeply, you must confront the shadow, the parts of you you've disowned, the anger you weren't allowed to feel, the sadness you were told was weakness, the desire you were taught to be ashamed of. You must bring it all home, because the shadow is not your enemy. It is your exiled strength. It is your unclaimed potential. It is every truth you buried in the name of being accepted. And what is healing, if not the process of bringing yourself back from exile? Not to become perfect, but to become whole. That's the real revolution. The revolution of wholeness. And once you taste it, once you stop abandoning yourself, something inside you shifts. You no longer react, you respond. You no longer cling, you release. You no longer beg, you believe, not in fantasies, not in illusions, but in you, and that belief becomes your armor, not the hard, brittle kind that isolates, but the kind that makes you soft without being vulnerable to harm, the kind that lets you feel without being ruled by what you feel, the kind that lets you love without needing to lose yourself in the process. You stop trying to be good enough for others and start becoming true enough for yourself, and then the world starts to change. Not because it's different, but because you are. You walk into rooms differently. Not with arrogance, with alignment. You speak differently. Not louder, but with gravity. You make decisions without waiting for someone else to approve them. You set boundaries, not as ultimatums, but as declarations of what your soul can no longer compromise. You learn to say no. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. You stop apologizing for your existence, because you finally understand your existence is not a burden. It is a miracle, and it's time you treated it like one. The moment you treat your life like the miracle it is, you stop giving pieces of yourself away just to be tolerated. You no longer trade your peace for approval, your voice for silence, or your truth for belonging. Because now you see it clearly, most people are not rejecting you, they are rejecting the version of you that reflects their own unhealed wounds. And when you no longer personalize their projections, something miraculous happens, your freedom begins. You stop trying to fix people who don't want to be whole. You stop trying to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop shrinking for rooms that were never built to hold your expansion. You walk out, not in anger, but in authority. You stop arguing, and you start creating. You stop proving, and you start becoming. Because when you realize you are no longer afraid of being alone, you also realize you are no longer easy to manipulate. And that's when your life becomes yours again. That's when you become untouchable, not because nothing hurts you, but because nothing owns you. You are no longer a puppet pulled by invisible strings of childhood wounds and unconscious conditioning. You've seen those strings now. You've traced them back to the hands that tied them. And one by one, you've cut them with clarity, with grief, with truth. Yes, it hurt. But healing always does. Real healing isn't gentle. It's not soft music and candles. It's raw. It's uncomfortable. It's nights on the floor questioning everything you thought you knew about yourself. It's realizing that the people you idolized were often the architects of your pain. It's grieving the version of you who had to fake it just to feel safe. But it's also the beginning of real power. Not domination. Not control. Not ego in disguise, but the power of knowing your inner world so intimately that nothing outside of you can threaten it. That's the power Jung spoke of. The inner sovereignty that comes from knowing your shadow, holding your pain, and still choosing love, not the soft kind, but the fierce kind that includes yourself. Because true love begins within. Not the romantic kind, not the fleeting kind, but the sacred love between you and yourself. The kind that holds your hand through every storm. The kind that looks at your flaws and says, even this is worthy. And when you know that kind of love, you don't chase it. You become it. You become the source. The well. The fire. You no longer beg for scraps of attention when you've built a feast of self-worth. You no longer crave someone to choose you when you have already chosen yourself. And once you've chosen yourself, you are no longer afraid of losing others. Because how can you fear the loss of what was never truly aligned with your truth? That fear no longer lives here. What lives here now is peace, not the fragile peace that depends on perfection, but the peace that holds the mess, the contradictions, the unfinished sentences and the broken pieces. Peace that does not flinch when life is chaotic, because it's rooted in something deeper than circumstance, yourself. And now you see, the person you were before was never wrong. They were surviving. They were doing the best they could with the tools they had. But you are no longer that person. You've gathered new tools now: awareness, clarity, boundaries, vision. And with those tools, you're building a new life. A life by design, not by default. A life of choice, not compulsion. A life that reflects who you've become, not who you were forced to be. And yes, there will still be challenges. There will still be pain. There will still be days where the old wounds whisper your name. But now you know how to meet them, not with avoidance, but with attention, because healing doesn't mean never feeling broken. It means knowing that brokenness is no longer the end of the story. It's just a chapter. One you've already outgrown, and you don't need to go back to reread it. The lesson has been learned, the cycle has ended, and you are not the same. You no longer bleed for people who wouldn't even hand you a bandage. You no longer explain yourself to those who only listen to argue. You no longer reach for doors that life has already locked behind you, because now you realize, not everything lost is a tragedy. Some losses are liberations, the loss of illusions, the loss of people-pleasing, the loss of needing to be understood by everyone. These are not wounds, they are wings. Wings that were always there, just waiting for you to stop folding them to fit. And now that you've stretched them, now that you've flown, you understand, there is no going back. Not because the past was unbearable, but because your expansion cannot be reversed. Once the soul remembers itself, it cannot forget. And you've remembered. You've remembered who you were before the world told you who to be. You've remembered the voice that existed before fear taught you to silence it. You've remembered the dream that never died, it only waited for your return. And now, with every breath, you return to truth, to power, to self, not the capital S self of ego and performance, but the self that Jung wrote of, the archetype of wholeness, the blueprint of who you are beneath the shadow, the center that integrates all your parts into one unshakable presence. And that presence is what makes you untouchable. Not untouched, you felt every kind of pain, but untouchable, because nothing outside of you can ever again define what lives within. And once you embody that center, the world begins to reorganize itself around you. Not because life becomes easier, but because you become anchored. You become the stillness in the storm, the eye in the hurricane. You watch the chaos swirl, but you do not flinch, because you are no longer fused with it. You are no longer at the mercy of every emotional gust or passing opinion. You have stepped back, not in retreat, but in realization. Realization that not every invitation to chaos deserves your RSVP. Not every conflict requires your engagement. Not every voice that speaks deserves your inner reaction. Because you have chosen discernment over distraction. You have chosen inner order over outer validation. And that choice, subtle at first, rewrites your life at its very foundation. You begin to feel it in the way you speak, in the space between stimulus and response, in the way you no longer need to justify your no, or over-explain your yes. You don't seek permission. You don't seek rescue. Because you are not lost, not anymore. You've walked through your own darkness without needing someone else to hold the torch. And in doing so, you became the light. This is what Jung meant when he said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. You didn't rise by avoiding the shadow. You rose by turning toward it. You stared down the parts of yourself you were once afraid to name, the rage, the grief, the envy, the shame, and you did not judge them. You held them like you would a crying child, because they were children once. Those parts of you that formed when no one came. When the world didn't feel safe. When love had conditions, and your worth depended on your performance. But you're not performing anymore. You're not performing, because you've made contact with something real. And real doesn't need to be polished. Real doesn't need to be palatable. Real just is. And when you live from that place, from your inner core instead of your outer shell, you stop being hurt by things that once shattered you. The silence no longer threatens you. The rejection no longer defines you. The uncertainty no longer shakes you. You realize now that the storm was never the enemy. The storm was your teacher. It stripped you of what was false so you could remember what was true. And now that you remember, you move differently. You enter conversations not to prove your worth, but to share your presence. You show up in relationships not to be completed, but to be mirrored. You walk away from what is misaligned, not because it's easy, but because you no longer betray yourself to be held. You don't seek comfort at the cost of your own integrity, because now, you belong to you. And in that belonging, you are protected, not by armor, but by alignment. Protected not by control, but by clarity. Clarity about who you are. Clarity about what you value. Clarity about where your energy is best invested. And that clarity gives birth to vision. Not a vision born from fantasy, but from truth. you start to see it, the life that reflects your inner wholeness. The work that ignites your fire, not drains it. The relationships that feel like home, not survival. The environments that feed your nervous system peace, not panic. You don't just dream it. You live it, not perfectly. Not all at once, but moment by moment, decision by decision, boundary by boundary, because transformation doesn't arrive as a lightning strike. It arrives as a return to yourself. Every time you choose to listen to your intuition instead of your fear. Every time you say no with your chest instead of a trembling voice. Every time you rest, not out of laziness, but out of reverence for your body's wisdom. You are no longer waiting for permission. You are no longer outsourcing your authority, because authority lives in your breath. In your spine. In the way you hold yourself when no one's watching. That is where your power lies now, not in what you show the world, but in what you no longer need to. You've stopped proving, you've stopped pleading, you've stopped performing, because you've remembered. And when you remember who you are, not the story, not the title, not the mask, but the soul underneath it all, you don't just heal. You awaken, and in that awakening, nothing and nobody can hurt you the same way again. Not because you are immune to pain, but because you are no longer afraid of it, because now you know, pain is not the enemy. It is the portal, fear is not the prison. It is the invitation, and wounds are not your weakness. They are the very doorways to your strength. You are not broken, you are becoming, and nothing, not their opinions, not your past, not your failures, can change that truth. You were not meant to fit in. You were meant to remember who you are, and live accordingly. You were meant to walk the edge between the known and the unknown, where most dare not step. Because you're not here to repeat patterns. You're here to alchemize them, to take the inherited trauma, the generational weight, the unspoken suffering, and do what those before you could not. Transmute it, not through denial, not through rage, but through awareness, through presence, through the kind of courage that says, this ends with me. That is the sacred task of the awakened soul, to carry the darkness not as a curse, but as a chrysalis. To stop running from the wound and instead, ask it what it came to teach, and the wound always answers. It whispers, you're not broken, you're birthing something real. That's why the pain hurts so deeply. Because what's leaving is the false self. The mask you once wore for love, for survival, for belonging. And the soul doesn't let go of illusion quietly. It screams. It trembles. It weeps. But if you listen closely, underneath that scream is truth, and that truth is your compass. It doesn't shout. It doesn't sell. It simply is, the quiet knowing beneath the noise, the unshakable stillness beneath the storm, the part of you that has always been here, untouched by time, unchanged by trauma. That self, the one Jung called the organizing principle of the psyche, that self is your sanctuary, and when you live from that center, you realize, nobody can truly abandon you, because you no longer abandon yourself. Nobody can devalue you, because your worth is no longer up for negotiation. Nobody can manipulate you, because you are no longer hungry for validation. This is not arrogance. It's alignment. You are not above pain, but you are no longer mastered by it. You are not above fear, but you walk through it with your eyes open. Because clarity is no longer a luxury, it's your path. And that path has taught you something no book ever could, that discipline is devotion. That freedom is responsibility. That inner peace is not found, it is forged. Forged in the fire of choice. The choice to rise instead of retreat. The choice to speak instead of silence. The choice to stand alone, if that's what integrity requires. Because now you know, peace isn't found in being unbothered. Peace is found in being unshakable, not numb. Not passive. But sovereign. The kind of peace that stands at the edge of chaos and says, I will not abandon myself, not here, not ever. And this is the power that changes lives. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't announce itself, but transforms everything it touches. The kind that doesn't seek the spotlight, but becomes the lighthouse. You don't need to preach your growth. You embody it. You don't need to convince others of your value. You live it. You don't need to retaliate against your past. You outgrow it, and that outgrowing, that evolution, it will cost you. It will cost you the comfort of the familiar. It will cost you the illusion of certainty. It will cost you relationships built on your old self. But what you gain in return is everything. You gain your soul back. You gain your voice, your vision, your vitality. You gain mornings that don't start with dread and nights that don't end in regret. You gain alignment, and with it, the peace of knowing that your life is finally your own. So let the world misunderstand you. Let them call you distant, strange, intense. Let them say you've changed, because you have. You've stopped being the version of yourself created by trauma, by fear, by culture. You've stepped into the version born from truth, and the truth doesn't need to be explained. It simply is. That's why nothing and nobody can hurt you the same way again. Because you no longer carry the illusion that they ever had that power. They only had access to what you hadn't yet reclaimed. But now, you've reclaimed it all. Your story, your shadow, your sovereignty. And from this place, your life becomes a mirror, not of who the world told you to be, but of who you've always been beneath the forgetting. That is the essence of Jung's message. The journey isn't about becoming someone else. It's about remembering who you are. Not the persona, but the self. Not the mask, but the mirror. And when you remember, the war ends. Not because the world changes, but because you do. And in that change, you become untouchable. Not invincible. Not perfect, but whole. And in your wholeness, you are finally free. And now, in this space of wholeness, you realize something profound. The final layer has been shed. It's not about reaching a point where nothing affects you. It's about realizing that everything you've gone through has led you here, to this moment, to this truth. You were never weak because you felt pain. You were strong because you embraced it. The myth that pain destroys you is shattered. Pain has never been your enemy. It's been the teacher you didn't want, but needed. And now that you know that, the world can no longer bully you with its expectations. The voices of doubt, of judgment, of fear, they are like echoes now. They speak, but they have no weight. They try to knock on your door, but you don't answer anymore. Not out of resistance, but out of recognition that they no longer belong in your life. You have stepped beyond the place where you needed validation, beyond the place where you sought approval. You no longer need to prove your worth to the world because you've already proven it to yourself. You've done the hard work of looking within, of confronting your shadows, of standing firm in your own truth. And in that truth, you found the unshakable foundation of your being. Now, when people try to push your buttons, you smile inwardly. Because you know, they're just playing out their own unresolved stories, their own fears and insecurities. They don't know your truth, and that's okay. You don't need them to. You don't need anyone to validate your worth. You stand firm in your own power, in the quiet of your own knowing, in the deep connection to your own soul. And that is the freedom they will never understand. Because this is the freedom that comes not from escaping life's pain, but from fully embracing your own power to transcend it. This is the place where nothing and nobody can hurt you, because you are the one who decides what touches you. You are the one who decides how much energy to give to the forces around you. And you have chosen peace. You have chosen resilience. You have chosen to step into your own light, not for validation, but because you are the light. So when the storms rage, when the battles feel endless, when the world tells you that you're not enough, remember this: you are untouchable because you are whole. You have faced the darkest corners of your soul and emerged not with scars, but with the wisdom of a warrior who knows that healing is a journey, not a destination. You have learned that being human isn't about perfection, it's about acceptance of your full range of emotions, your contradictions, your flaws, your humanity. And in accepting yourself, you have become powerful beyond measure. And now, as you move forward, you move with a grace that comes not from avoiding pain, but from knowing that nothing can ever truly break you again. The world will test you, the people around you will challenge you, but your foundation is no longer fragile. It is unshakable. You are not afraid of life anymore. You are not afraid of love anymore. You are not afraid of loss, rejection, or uncertainty, because you know this one truth: you are whole. You are enough. You are untouchable. And as you walk through this world, you do so with the quiet confidence that nothing and nobody can hurt you again, not because you are impervious to life's challenges, but because you now walk with the unshakable knowing that you are the one who chooses how to respond. You are the one who chooses your path. And that choice? That choice is your power. The world can do its worst, but you will stand tall. Because you've already risen, and now you know who you are, and nothing at all, can ever take that away from you again.